welcome to the October 19th, 2022 City Council work session. Thank you for joining us in this hybrid meeting format. For work sessions like this one where there is no opportunity for public comment, those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcast and meeting materials page. Thank you all for joining us. And with that, I call this work session to order and turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Our first work session today is on the city's Intergovernmental Relations Committee and our legislative policies and legislative policies and priorities for 2023. We do this every couple of years. Ethan's going to provide the presentation. We'll have plenty of time for discussion. I think we're ideally seeking direction on the two documents that were included in the AIS, and that helps provide clarity for our advocacy at the state and federal level. So with that, I'll turn it over to our Intergovernmental Relations Director, Manager, Ethan Nelson.
Thank you, Sarah.
I feel like there should have been drums with that.
Yeah. And then let's see, turn it on in the slideshow. Okay. On there? There we go. Perfect.
Don't try to do interpretive dance, Sarah.
I know, I'm still behind on that.
Well, good afternoon, Mayor Venice, City Councilors. As Sarah said, Ethan Nelson, Intergovernmental Relations Manager, which for those listening on in means that my work is to support the advocacy efforts for Eugene's policy and funding goals at the state and federal level. Okay, I need this a little bit closer to me. Then I get to lead the, there we go. All right. Today we'll walk through the IGR program goals, the IGR process, the 2023 policy framework, our 2023 state priorities. We'll touch briefly on federal United Front efforts and wrap up with a discussion. Specifically, we're asking the council to take action on two items provided in your packet, as Sarah mentioned, the 2023 Eugene state and federal policy document and the 2023 state priorities. First off, we'll start with the goals. These goals provide direction for the efforts of the IGR program, approaching relationships with local, state, and federal partners in an enhanced manner to grow and leverage partnerships through greater engagement of agencies and elected officials. So what does that look like? A recent example is during the 2022 legislative session, Eugene secured $5 million from the legislature to support our unhoused response efforts. This was a larger amount than any other comparable size city was received. Participating in larger policy discussions at national and state level. For example, the FCC, transportation infrastructure, housing, homelessness, shelter, revenue reform. What does that look like? Well, this year, Mayor Venice is participating in the Oregon Legislature's Resilient Building Task Force, which is advancing climate actions outlined in the CAP 2.0, as well as her continued participation on the EPA's Local Government Advisory Committee, where she has led recommendations favorable to cities as EPA writes rules for the Investing in Infrastructure and Jobs Act, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. Greater engagement of the Eugene area state delegation to leverage opportunities afforded via their leadership roles. Fortunately for Eugene, we have senior legislators in Salem that advocate for our interests, and at the federal level, Congressman DeFazio, while retiring, serves as a chair of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and was a key supporter for the $19 million Department of Transportation grant for Franklin Boulevard and the recent $1.2 million Economic Development Administration grant for mountain bike trails at Susan R. Lee Park. Senator Wyden is chair of the Senate Finance Committee, and Senator Merkley chairs two separate subcommittees in the Appropriations and the Environment and Public Works Committees. Eugene continues to be supported on our funding and policy asks by these senior members. So the IGR process, as you may remember, at the last IGR work session in November 22nd, 2021, council passed the motion that included, quote, provide full council with weekly written reports during the session and a process for bringing up concerns from non-IGR council members and minority opinions. On January 2022, the IGR committee approved a process for greater engagement with city council and communicated that access to city council on February 6th. That process includes one, creating a process for non-IGR counselors to bring a policy issue to the committee, 2, providing regular legislative updates from the IGR manager during the session. And 3, sharing regular updates from the committee by the committee chairperson during the reports period of city council meetings. The weekly legislative updates will resume in mid-January 2023, corresponding with the start of the 2023 legislative session. As the chairperson role will be switching, updates to council will resume once the new chair is identified. On to our first document for review and approval. The 2023 Eugene state and federal policy document provides the framework for the city's advocacy efforts. This document was revamped in 2013, where it was pared down from a much larger document that served as our policy guidance. What the policy framework provides is clear direction on what the city's policy position is on both priority topics, for example, local control, and also on pertinent or emerging issues, for example, climate-friendly and equitable communities. This is of critical importance to clearly support our state and federal advocacy efforts in an efficient and timely manner. I tend to look at this as the playbook for the session. The document is reviewed and approved by the IGR committee each year and was approved by the full city council last November. While the document is not all encompassing for adopted city policy, the focal areas identified on this slide cover much of what our city does. In times where we don't have clear guidance, the IGR team will consult with the city manager and executive managers for direction, and as necessary, bring items to the IGR committee for deliberation, and if required, bring items to the full city council for deliberation. The second document in your packet that we seek approval from you is the State of Oregon priorities, including 8 different initiatives. Consider the priorities document as a proactive what Eugene wants. While the previous policy document clarifies our position on legislation and bills as they are introduced. For reference, the upcoming long session starts mid-January and runs roughly 6 months, wrapping up in June. Legislators and committees are not limited to the number of bills they are allowed to introduce during the long session just by committee deadlines. There will likely be in the range of 3,000 to 4,000 bills introduced this next year. Again, this year we have contracted with the team from CFM Advocates and will continue to be represented by Zach Reeves and Ryan Gleason in Salem. So on to the priorities. During the 2022 session, cities were awarded direct funds for unhoused response support. Eugene led this initiative when we were not included in a League of Oregon City County pilot with the city county pilot, and the governor's housing unhoused ask had no investment for cities. The legislature faced a strong budget and we stepped into a leadership role with 6 other similar sized cities in Portland. And the result was a $5 million direct allocation to Eugene for unhoused response. This last spring, the Oregon Mayors Association created a task force to develop a coalition of cities, making a request to the legislature in 2023. Mayor Vinnis is serving on this task force, and at the LOC conference in early October, the task force approved a recommendation that, quote, or here's the component parts, each city will be allocated funds annually in amount equal to $40 per resident in accordance with the latest official population estimates from Portland State University. This equates to just around $7 million for the city of Eugene. In no instance will an incorporated city receive less than $50,000 in direct funding. And 3, cities may elect to use funds for their own homelessness response and prevention services, or may redirect their funds to community partners who are required to use the funds for homelessness response and prevention services. And then 4, a wide range of services are including aligning with the city of Eugene's 2023 budgeted unhoused response and investments. Moving forward, securing direct funding to cities for unhoused response remains our top priority, advancing council's priorities in this area and aligning with both the top item of importance and top item for urgency identified within the recent community survey. During the 2021 and 2022 session, this item was identified, the item in front of you right now was identified as a priority and was part of our American Rescue Plan. Thanks.
I rescued you.
I rescued you. I need that. Funding request to the local delegation. Over the interim, Eugene led discussions with regional partners to identify the scope and magnitude of the issue and was able to gain support from Representative Nathanson, who is the co-chair of the Joint Information and Technology Committee. The concept for a center of excellence gained traction and a work group was established. In 2022, House Bill 4155 was introduced and gained wide support from legislators, but could not move quick enough during the short session. It is a top priority for the Joint Committee in 2023, and ISD Director Robin Mayall sits on the work group and is providing leadership on this topic. This bill was introduced in 2021 session with a fair amount of input, but an Oregon Supreme Court case was being worked through, so many of the supportive legislators were reticent to move this bill forward. We continue to support the clarification with state statute of the ability for public agencies to exempt from public records requests items that are covered under the attorney-client privilege in perpetuity. The city of Portland is leading with the bill draft this year. We're supporting that. The Oregon Health Authority submitted a policy option package, a POP, for the 2023-2025 biennium that includes over $250 million for stabilization centers, 988 crisis line, and mobile crisis response. Additionally, Lane County is seeking funding for Behavioral Health Stabilization Center. Eugene Police Department Captain Doug Mozan is representing the city on the executive team, and leadership continues to engage in conversations with Lane County regarding the specifics of their proposal. We're asking for your broad support on this topic for the session, with an understanding that as more details are solidified, we may move into a higher level of engagement and commitment during the session. Additionally, on the topic of behavioral health, we have requested a bill draft via Senator Manning that would allow cities to be eligible for Medicaid reimbursement for mobile crisis response services. Senator Wyden secured additional funding for reimbursement for the next 3 years, and Oregon is one of a handful of states that is participating in this program. We are working to access these funds via statutory changes and likely OHA administrative rule changes. Senate Bill 1565 from last year required that public services provide options for cash payment. Due to operational changes within the city's parking program, including at the Eugene Airport, Eugene seeks a minor amendment to provide exemptions for certain types of payments, as well as clarifying language related to currency and coinage. This is basically a kind of a cleanup issue that we're trying to address to help with our operations at the parking and airport. To enhance the security of the City of Eugene information technology systems and assets, the city seeks an exemption to the sharing of public records be created by the Oregon legislature for public agencies regarding plans and systems, including contractual documents related to cybersecurity. A similar exemption was passed in Georgia, Kansas, Michigan, Vermont, and Washington to exempt certain cybersecurity information from disclosure under public records law. And there's two placeholders we'll touch on right now. So capital construction placeholder. We have a number of options for capital construction requests at the legislature in 2023. I'm working with the exec team to identify these funding needs and prioritize them based on council priorities, feedback from the community survey, and the political climate and the legislature's priorities, specifically understanding what that looks like after the general election this early November. We propose to bring a short list of priority projects back to the IGR committee at their December meeting for discussion and action, with a follow-up memo to City Council before the start of the winter break. And then the second placeholder is on the Resilient Building Task Force. In 2021 and 2022, the city led a coalition advocating for the ability of jurisdictions to adopt the Oregon REACH code as the base energy efficiency code, should the presiding body seek that option, the presiding body being the City Council. In 2022, the initiative was defeated with a compromise created in Senate Bill 1518 that requires, quote unquote, requires task force to identify and evaluate policies related to building codes and building decarbonization for new and existing buildings that would enable the state to meet greenhouse gas emission reduction goals while maximizing other benefits. And it also requires the task force to make recommendations to the 2023 legislature. Mayor Vinnis has been participating in these meetings since April as a city representative and advocating for local perspectives. One of the main focal areas has been to increase incentives for the adoption adoption of heat pumps, advocating for greater representation and equity in code boards, and aligning the GHG reduction goals, reduction goals within state statute. As the task force finalizes adoption of these recommendations in the next month, it is proposed to bring back to the IGR committee in December those items that align best with council adopted policy, specifically the CAP 2.0, the HIP, the Housing Implementation Plan pipeline, and any decarbonization direction, with a follow-up memo to council before the winter break. The last item, the annual United Front delegation is likely going to be occurring in April of 2023. We're still working through the focus of the trip, as the midterm elections will have impact on the strategies for that trip. We have on our kind of dashboard is telecom policy, unhoused funding, broadband projects, economic development, and energy climate funding for focal areas on potential topics for meetings. And then lastly, the council had allocated part of the American Rescue Plan Act, I got it that time, ARPA funding to hire an ARPA manager. Jay Runte has been with the city about 6 months and has taken the lead on coordinating information on ARPA related projects and assisting with reporting efforts. Most importantly, he is coordinating cross-departmental discussions related to funding opportunities from ARPA, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, IIJA, and will be supporting Inflation Reduction Act grant applications as well. We are building internal capacity to be competitive for federal grants and also build strong relations with our state of Oregon partner agencies. And with that, that's it. Back to you, Mayor Rittenhouse.
That is terrific. I thank you. That there is so much information in packed into what you have just delivered, and I just want to express a moment of gratitude for Ethan and for the work that you do here, because there are so many moving parts with all of these discussions locally, at the state level, at the federal level, that his work has been really valuable. So just wanted to appreciate that, how much it takes to keep all these issues in motion and supporting the city. With that, I see Mike and then Alan.
Thank you, Mayor, very much. And thank you, Ethan, for the presentation. I have 2 issues I wanted to go through in my time. One is more of a process issue, and the other is a specific issue related thing I didn't see in any of the presentation. So first, process. I'm still pretty cranky about the fact that we didn't get a full presentation to council on CFEC until after rulemaking was done. And I guess I just would love somebody to answer whether, and I don't know who to ask that question of, maybe the mayor, I don't know. Where was that decision made not to involve the full council on that issue as it went through rulemaking or was proposed to do so with LCDC? Is that something that comes up? I mean, I know it was talked about in intergovernmental relations quite a bit, and I know Mayor and Claire were very involved in the process. But I think that's something that, just like we reformed IGR and how it involves itself with the rest of the council, that as an agency issue should also have been more prominently discussed. How did that decision making happen if we wanted it to change in the future?
Yeah, I don't, I'll sort of answer this hopefully the same as I did last time. There was never a decision not to. I think what we did was we kept the IGR committee informed. We sent a couple of emails to council just letting you know. In the very first work session that you had after those rules were adopted, we came to present them, because up until then it was a bit of a moving target. And they changed sort of quickly, especially I think towards the end. So I think I took that feedback from the last time you asked this question as like, okay, you know, we could, as the, I think, new policy shows, any member of the council can bring forward a, hey, we'd like to talk about this at the IGR committee or beyond. So we tried to keep you informed. There wasn't a place until right after your break to really dive in.
I appreciate that.
Hearing wasn't good enough.
I appreciate that answer. I personally got calls from other elected officials from other cities on that a month, 2 months in advance, but I was undereducated about everything it implied. And so that's where I suppose I relied on, we would go through a work session and briefing on that prior to any sort of city direction being established about what we wanted to do in response to the effort statewide.
Councilor Clark, if I may, just
Yes.
really briefly, what I would add is that the two documents that are in front of you today, one of those is policy document, and that really provides council additional clarity and council direction on advocacy efforts for all Eugene staff, including the IGR programs. And so in regards to the climate friendly equitable communities, as those rules were being discussed in draft form at the state level, we were utilizing, staff across the organization, we're utilizing the direction in this document, but also council adopted policies to advocate for the city's position. And so what that looked like from the beginning was reduction of the complexity of the rules because it was overly complex, and we really have taken that position in the past because of implementation of state statute at the local level is very difficult when it's not streamlined and aligned with our code, specifically around land use code. The second was expansion of the timelines, both of the public process. We thought it was too fast, and we were asking for timelines to be extended. And additionally, we're asking for timelines to be extended in the rules for compliance and implementation. And then three, we were continually asking for additional funding because we saw this as an unfunded mandate. And so those three topical areas were core to our advocacy during the rule making process, and then throughout as those rules were being promulgated. And those will continue to be some of the, if this council adopts the documents today, those will continue to be our policies that we will advocate for at the legislature during the session. So just wanted to give you that kind of background as to.
And I appreciate that very much. I sometimes hold, as a representative of a chunk of people, a different view than the majority on council, and I want to be effective in advocating for those constituents. That's my job. And I want to be able to do so in a way where I have better information about efforts like that than maybe standard city policy, because I may disagree with it. And I'm searching for ways to plug into our process to be better informed about those efforts so that I could take that effort on my own if I wanted to. Which leads me to another question, and then I'll talk about the policy issue in a second round. If a counselor is advocating for a position diametrically opposed to city position at another level of government, is there a code or a rule that says that's not okay?
I would turn to your there's a provision in your operating agreement regarding that outlines the process that you follow for advocating positions and whatnot. And as folks are talking, I can take a look. There are specific provisions about that in your operating agreement.
Because I don't want to break the rules, but I think the majority makes decisions I disagree with at times, and I want to be more effective at other levels advocating for those. So that's why I asked.
Mike, I'll give you a second round if you need that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, Alan.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I want to thank the IGR and Ethan for coming up with the process. I was one of the primary movers of that because I felt very disconnected from the legislative process and the IGR. If you're not on the IGR committee over the last few sessions. And so hopefully a lot of this stuff, written reports and including the information in our packets is going to help. I think that the one on the process where we have to bring or submit a request for an IGR chair and then an agenda item brought up on IGR committee meeting if we want through a different work session poll. I'm not sure how that works. What happens with that? Does the counselor then have to go to the RGR meeting, and what's the point of the committee then? And I'm not sure how that's going to actually play out. Does anybody have any insight into that?
So, Councilor Zelenka, as I understand your question, the process that the IGR committee approved and we sent to council related to your direction for coming up with how to engage non-IGR committee council members into the IGR process. We really looked at it from the standpoint of trying to create some consistency with your existing work session poll. And so we use the same document and the template and that process to say, if you have an item that you'd like to bring up for the IGR committee to discuss, then it's good to be able to capture that and document it so that we're all on the same page. Submit that to myself or the IGR committee chair, and then we would discuss that. Does it mean that you would need to go to the person submitting that request need to go to the IGR committee meeting? Not necessarily. We would probably follow up and talk with you about the concern and the issue. And just as note, we haven't received any of those over the past year. And so we would put those into play and be able to have those discussions, and then more than likely have it as a topical discussion at IGR committee. And then given IGR committee rules, if there's a 3-0 vote of the 3 voting members, then the item moves. If there's a split vote, then the item would then be referred to full council for discussion and action. So I hope that answers what your question was.
Yeah, well, not exactly, but sure. I think we'll have to play that out. Well, the reason there wasn't any requests for it because felt disconnected from it. So that results in no action. I can't think of more things that would be more important than what's going on in the legislature when they're in session, especially during those 5 months that they're in session. And our response to spending too much time on it was to overreact and swing the pendulum to almost spending no time on it. In fact, it was erased from the agenda on the council. And CFEC is a great example that Mike brought up. I completely felt like the council was out of the loop on that. IGR was in, but the council wasn't. I don't know exactly how to do this, but one of the things I think that we should look at doing is actually having a regular council agenda item being on the council meetings, what's going on in the legislature and reports from the IGR, and have that discussion at the whole council so we can have an other opportunity. The process you just described, I think may work, but I'm not sure because I don't know how it's going to work. But if having it be as a regular item, I know it takes time, but the pendulum swing from too much time to zero time doesn't work for me. I don't think it works for several other councils either. So I would propose that the mayor and the city manager and whoever the IGR chair now is, that they come back with and spend some time on the full council agenda to talk about these items. And I have a couple other things I'll take a second round for, Mayor.
Okay.
But any response to that?
I just want a moment. I mean, that's clear to me, although it was part of our agreement last year, and Councilor Syrett, as IGR president, did give you regular reports at items through the legislative session. So I'm hearing you that that's not enough, but I just want to point out that we heard this complaint last year, and that was part of the response. Okay, I have Matt next.
Thank you, Mayor. As someone who served on IGR and now is not because of my employment in the legislature, I recognize the enthusiasm that's brought to the conversation, especially the points brought up by Councilor Zelenka. And I want to applaud Ethan and the IGR committee for preparing what's in front of us today and putting myself in the camp that says, this is great, let's do more of this. And I recognize the time constraint, but this is wholly valuable. We could dive into a couple points, and then I want some clarification on one piece in particular revolving around SB 1565, the cash payment piece. And then there's a piece missing that I want to go to. But the things I want to highlight in particular, Ethan, in the public safety piece, there's a point that talks about number 6, Eugene supports after school funding for youth that contributes to the prevention and reduction of juvenile crime, including childhood literacy programs, such as the Imagination Library Program. I love the Imagination Library Program. I never would have considered Imagination Library to fall into a public safety bucket, but could we touch on, please, the opportunities in front of the state of Oregon to potentially expand the Imagination Library Program statewide?
Councilor Keating, I appreciate the question, and what I would say is we'll get back to you as as more of the bills are and legislative concepts are rolled forward for the next session. I will identify any the Imagination Library programs, and also check in with our Library and Recreation Cultural Services Director and the Library Director to find out if they have seen any policy items that might be coming forward. So it'll be more of as I said, in the policies document, it's much more of items that come on up. We're going to either support through coalitions or act against. It's not necessarily something that we're going to put on as our priorities and then go and do a whole lot of advocacy, hard advocacy on. So I just want to kind of make sure we're clear on the difference between the two documents.
Well, great, thank you. So I'm going to leapfrog to my last point then about priorities and things we're going to advocate for. The mayor and I were at two separate events over the weekend in which we heard from constituents concern over the abuse of recall lever, timing of recall elections, reasons to recall, signature thresholds, placement on an election calendars to when a recall or a special election would occur. I recognize that any member of council can bring forward an issue such as elections reform or recall reform, so I'm doing that now. But I'm surprised that this issue, especially considering the former chair of IGR was unfortunately recalled. I'm surprised the issue hasn't rose to well, maybe it has had it has been a conversation at IGR, but I'm surprised that it's not that's type of election reform hasn't risen to a priority when I keep hearing it time and again that there needs to be a legislative fix revolving around recalls.
And Councilor Keating, as we've discussed in the past within the IGR committee, the IGR committee is not making new policy. It is clarifying and advocating and advancing adopted city policy. And so if the city council were to take action on any item that is not articulated currently, then we could be taking action. So the item that you brought on up is one that I would, if it came up in an IGR committee meeting, I would say it's something to bring to the full council table and put onto the agenda for a full council discussion, and then getting policy direction from full council.
Okay, thank you. If I could go to Senate Bill 1565, please. Well, I'm gonna need another round, Mayor. I got 15 seconds left. I'll pause there.
Okay, anybody else needing a first round before we go? All right, I have Mike, then Alan, then Matt again.
And Councilor Clark, I have an answer for you regarding the direction in your operating agreement, section 9 and specifically 9.02. It has a paragraph about state and federal lobbying, and it has some information about appropriate for councilors or the mayor to avoid expressions of personal dissent on adopted council policy. But it also goes on to say a councilor or the mayor in disagreement with an adopted policy should not be deprived of the right to express such views, and the appropriate officials are at another time in another place. However, they should feel bound to advise those whom such disagreement is expressed that it's an individual view and the council has taken a different position. So it's very specifically addressed in your operating agreements, and there's some other. Overall, it is council has a stated desire to have a single voice, but if there's a dissenting voice, they need to identify that it is a dissenting voice. This is the sum and substance of it all.
Cool, thank you very much. If you would do me the favor of sending me the reference points in code so that I can look that up as well, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, send it to everybody, please.
Yeah.
Yes.
Couple of things. Number one, the nature of IGR let me just say, I hope we're going to have at least one more work session on this issue, and that we won't be just approving the policy documents that form the framework of what will be lobbied for. I hope we don't do that without at least another work session. One of my sentiments about IGRs is it's always reactive. We're always reacting to what someone proposed at the legislative level, rather than working with our local legislators more than staff does ordinarily to try and create things that we'd like to see get through the legislature and be helpful. I'd like to see us do more of that. Number two, to the specific issue, and this is where it connects. I didn't, and perhaps Ethan, you can speak to this as connected to one of the policy points you mentioned up front. But the funding that flows through ballot measure 110 and the legislature working to clarify the standards involved in the money flow and how that happens and to whom and for what. Are we working hard to see the legislature pass something that clarifies that this year and makes that a more useful tool for us after the legislature meets?
Councilor Clark, related to Measure 110 and the implementation of that, it is not on our priorities list, and it is not necessarily in our policies document. What I can tell you is that the League of Oregon Cities has a priority this year for Measure 110 revision. And it's also been discussed in some of the gubernatorial campaigns. And I think that what we're also trying to figure out is some of our local legislators have given us direction on is that before we jump in to make major changes, we need to let some of the money flow through. The Oregon Health Authority was fairly delayed, and they've received a lot of critique on their flow of the money out on into the programs that would benefit from the reallocation of those Measure 110 dollars. And our legislators have kind of given us insight that says, let's see where those dollars flow and how we can work on it. So it's a complex landscape, and it's developing. And we have not taken direct priorities, but we certainly could if council and IGR were to direct us to.
It's my opinion that it's taking far, far, far too slowly. I think we need more direct decision-making on that, or some different flow of monies to allow for decision-making that looks at good drug treatment programs that need the funding. There's very few things, and I'm sure a couple other counselors agree with me, there's very few things needed locally more than an enhancement to mental health care and drug treatment. And the money's flowing through, it's already been passed. It's just that they're not sure who's qualified to do those services and who should get paid to do it. And I think that's something we need to focus in on and do a better job advocating for. I'm hopeful that after the election cycle this year, we can see more lobbying at multiple levels of government and see some different results. Lastly, with my 18 seconds, I would say we need that one more work session also because we're not talking yet about any major changes to citywide policy direction. And we've just seen a poll that says the majority of people who live here think the city is heading in the wrong direction. I can barely think of anything that needs more revision and time talking about it than our city policies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alan and then Matt.
Yeah, this is gonna be, Alan agrees with Mike Day. I totally agree with what Mike said about Measure 110 and all the issues. I didn't vote for that. I think it's been a disaster rolling it out. And I think we're starting to see the local impacts of that, the failure of rolling that out. And it's starting to impact what's happening on our streets, and we're seeing it. So I think that's should be a very high priority for us. I also agree with Mike that we need another work session on this, especially the IGR process. And I'd like to formally request that we consider regular council agenda items during the session for discussion at full council as part of that conversation. Switching topics slightly, there's on the memorandum, seek capital funding, or our priorities, seek capital funding for priority projects. It said for capital projects. I appreciate that the M's got put into the economic development section of the bills, but is there a list of these capital projects that we're proposing? I didn't see that that we can see.
Councilor Zenka, what I was proposing to do is that I'm working with the executive team over the next 4 to 6 weeks to identify, and we've kind of set some guidance as to what types of projects, and those include council priorities, alignment with the community survey, where the project is in terms of its coming to fruition, its project planning, its financing, and then also does it align with lottery bond funding and the statutory requirements under that. And so we're going through a process to pull together a list of projects. We have a number of needs across the city. And so we want to identify what those projects are, and what was proposed, or what is proposed, is to bring that list to the IGR committee for review, and then we will make a recommendation as far as what those priorities are. And if the IGR committee approves that, then we would like to send a memo to council. But it sounds as if at least you and Councilor Clark would like to see it come back to the full council, which like to be able to understand how that works.
Another great example. I think that the IGR should make a recommendation of the council, and the council should weigh in on what the priorities are that we're going to put forth. That's a great example of how this process should work at the full council level. So hopefully that can be incorporated. Could somebody bring up the slide with the capital on it while I'm talking about this next issue? On item number 6, the Resilient Efficient Buildings Task Force. I think the mayor's had great representation on that. And I think performance standards and heat pumps and material disclosure is going to come out of that. But I'm quite skeptical that we're going to see much in terms of decarbonization or issues around natural gas. I think a lot of people are recognizing that the climate protection program actually makes natural gas decarbonize 50% by 2035 and 90% by 2045. And I think that's, so I think they're going to have a hard time coming up with policies around natural gas and decarbonization. That slide that I wanted to have that picture show because the slide with the capital on it, the sculpture in the foreground, actually, this is just a fun fact to know and tell, the sculpture in the foreground is actually a sculpture created by a Eugenian. His name is Bill Blix. He lives in the Laurel Hill Valley. He actually built that sculpture and put it, and it's the sculpture fountain that's in the Capitol Mall. So yeah, if you see that, it's the part of it that's in the foreground to the right, and something to kind of a little bit be proud of, that a Eugenian Bill Blix did that.
Thank you. Matt.
How could I follow that, man?
Yeah, no, I don't know.
That's pretty great, Alan. Thank you. On the attachment B of the IGR approved priorities, the final bucket, it's the I guess I'm looking at page 2 of the memorandum from the IGR manager to council and the mayor. Number 7 hones in on SB 1565. And I'm just curious about the cleanup, because the Senate bill, my understanding, requires that that all public services provide cash payment options. Do our parking meters throughout the municipality, in particular downtown, provide cash payment options as we speak?
Yes, Councilor Keating, to the question, we do have cash payments. The clarifying piece that we're seeking to get a small adjustment in is that in the statutory language, they didn't just give one word to kind of cover cash. They actually differentiated between currency and coinage. And when it gets into a literal implementation or definition of it, some of our facilities will take currency but not coinage, and some of them will take coinage but not currency. And so we want to make sure that as we look at our operations, that we are complying with state law as written in statute. And so we've said, oh, there's a small tweak that we need to make. And the bill sponsor, Senator Brzezinski, we've discussed it with him, and he said, yeah, we're working, because there's quite a number of exemptions in that law that provided for a lot of different operational impacts across a bunch of different industries. Secondarily, the issue that we're looking at is that in a lot of instances, we've moved to cashless payments as an efficiency measure and a cost saving measure for the city operations. And so as we look at that, we're also needing to balance then the direction within this state law, which was really focused in on ensuring that customers are able to utilize cash payments if they don't have access to a credit card or debit card. And so we're just navigating that with Senator Brzezinski and understanding kind of what are the exemptions and how we can navigate through the existing ones. But the big one is just that we've got language that just really clarifies currency and coinage.
I appreciate the clarification because I was fully prepared to be, as our operating agreement indicates, a dissenting opinion. But that's helpful. I appreciate that. One of our equity and inclusion pieces in attachment A indicates our support, our city's support for state and federal legislation that expands protections for people based on the source of income, et cetera, et cetera. And if there are barriers for folks to either park or engage with the city at any level, if there are cash barriers, I would hope that those wouldn't be exemptions. I hope we would work with those residents to allow for cash payments, but it sounds like that's the track we're taking. Am I framing that?
Yes.
Appropriate? Thank you. Appreciate it, Ethan. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Well, I have Jennifer in the queue. Do you want to speak first to?
No, go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. So thank you so much, Ethan, for coming here today. I just wanted to say that I also, and I'll be joining the committee soon, so I look really forward to that. But I also agree with Councilor Zelenka that bringing the priority projects a recommendation forward so that council, at least it's in that category of no surprises, right? Just so we can have a brief discussion and hopefully not have to rehash the entire thing, which sometimes does happen. And I understand that we're trying to avoid some of that, but and save ourselves some time. But I do think that's one that makes sense to come back and have a discussion about, did we make the right recommendations or didn't we? But other than that, I think these priorities are well thought out and cover a good variety of different things that need to either be fixed or we really want to support. I know that you guys have to be really careful that you don't choose too many because it kind of waters down your ability to get in front of folks. And really, that's something that we had talked about once, which was really helpful for me to understand that maybe I want to do 20 things, but if I'm confusing the legislature by talking about all these different things, they're not going to understand where our really top priorities are. So I appreciate the group doing the hard work of narrowing it down to the things that really matter at this particular point in time. I think you've done a good job. And unless there's something specific that we need to schedule another work session for, I'm happy to go ahead and approve this today. I haven't heard anything specific that we need to rediscuss, but if I'm wrong about that, that would be helpful information.
Right. And before I go to Randy, and I'm understanding that some of the critical pieces are going to come back to council in December.
Yeah, I was just going to clarify some of what I was hearing, and I want to make a couple of comments about timing and timeliness.
I also, before you go there, I do have Randy in the queue.
That's fine.
Is that okay? All right, good. Maybe that'll answer your
I
question.
like batting cleanup.
Okay.
Yeah, it was starting to feel like two separate work sessions potentially, and I don't know where the majority is at. One to kind of nail this down and maybe potentially add some things if people want to put motions forward to add 110 or whatever into there. And And then the second one would be in December. And I think, Ethan's point about making sure we're bringing forward the right projects, given the elections, what we're seeing, what the possibilities are, that would happen closer to December. I think that's, however we do that, but the timeliness around getting the overall policy document is more important in terms of the pre-work we do. There's a lot happening already around this work that the more run-up time we give Ethan, the easier it will be. So I just wanted to mention that if we need to come back with a work session on this item again, I think one of the things we're going to bump up against is some of our calendar also has time restricted motions. So for example, we could come back on Monday, but renter protections, we were to bring back phase 2 before November 1st. And so we're right up against that. And then the second thing I just wanted to say is if we need to come back, we can, because the second item actually has some other really important timing that we can't get too much farther down the calendar. So thanks.
Okay, thank you. Randy?
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Ethan. I thought it was a very good report. I liked the way it was laid out and appreciated the presentation. I actually wanted to go towards the end with my comments because I'm newer on the IGR committee and I really wanted to hear what my colleagues had to say and what was important to them. We are kind of representatives of this body, so I think that was important. With that said, I support what I'm hearing, particularly from Councilors Clark and Zelenka about wanting information to come back to the full council more frequently. I don't think we need to load it up excessively, but I just think that touch point is really important as we are pushing things that really affect our community and how we are able to operate as a city. So I'm very much in support of that. I would also be in support of adding in ballot measure 110. In my opinion, we basically have received all the points of failure that are involved in 110, and we didn't get any of the benefits, i.e. the 15 treatment centers. Does anyone know where any of these are? That's because they don't exist. And so I do think we need to revisit that in some kind of bringing this back to a point of reasonable progress, whether it's taking it back out to the voters, whether it's trying to see what we can do to get the treatment piece, because the treatment piece is not happening. And that's a big part of our problem with what's going on the street and some of the things that we're trying to wrestle with right now. So I do think we need that front and center. And I think that's every bit as important as some of these other pieces on here. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, so I have a process question. Okay, Emily, go for it.
I just want to back up the opposition to 110. It's not even so much the treatment centers that happen to all that marijuana money for the treatment centers that aren't happening and need it for other things. But a really big issue for me is that it takes away the police's ability to crack down on drug use. Because unless you're actively selling a large enough or have enough large amount to prove it's for sale, it's more trouble. You can get in more trouble for smoking marijuana than you can for shooting up meth. And that's not working. So anything we can do to encourage the either to get it to the public to vote or the legislature to do something about it, I would be in big favor of. Otherwise, I'm happy with the list. And as long as we, of course, have the ability to come talk about it, I'm good with it. So thank you for all the work. This is a tremendous amount of work, and I appreciate that. Thanks.
So I see, Alan, your hand is raised, but I just want to ask a process question. Is it possible for us to approve the policy document and come back with language around measure 110 to be approved at a later time so that we're moving forward? Because I think I don't want us to craft that on the fly. I think it's appropriate. IGR is scheduled to meet next week. Am I correct about that? Next Wednesday? I think. Was it 2 weeks? Well, at any rate, it feels like we can, if the rest of the document is acceptable, we can approve it now so staff can move forward knowing that, and then come back with language around measure 110 so that it's we're not. Does that work for Counselor? And I'm looking for thumbs up, and then Alan, I see Mike shaking his head, and then I see Alan with a hand up. So Alan, what, please, whatever you need.
I was gonna suggest a similar thing that we don't need to hold up the whole list to add something to it, because 99% of it's fine. It's somewhat generic and very lengthy anyway. So I'm okay with that. I had a question about the motion that's in the packets about the list. It doesn't have anything to do with the IGR process. And when I was talking about another work session, I was thinking more about that than I was about the list. So that's what I was thinking about when I made that suggestion. And then speaking of process, on the fifth priority, support for state investment in mental health and behavioral science health systems, I was thinking earlier that we needed to be more informed about that and what the landscape is, and be more informed, because that's not our purview, but we need to understand, what does the county do? What does the state do? What do the private pieces do? How does all this work together? And is that something we were going to do, or is that something I need to put a work session poll out for?
Yeah.
Do you want me to answer? Sure. Respond. Councilor Zuleika, I think where we were coming from with this one is that we had heard at a number of council work sessions related to unhoused response, and is that there is a desire to advocate at the state level for a greater investment in enhanced services related to the behavioral health and the mental health systems. And so your question is spot on in that it's not our purview, and to get to the point where we would have a much more articulate statement and priority would require a great deal of effort and work. And so I think that what we're trying to do is to say, we're being responsive of council's interests, and that we want to continue to work on this. It's on our radar. And as we get more specifics, and in the presentation, I spoke about the OHA POP, their investment, and then as well, Lane County's current discussions for a behavioral health stabilization center. As we get more clarity on that, I think it would be going through IGR and then updating council, and it could be in a more robust manner that you've advocated for. But in the very least, coming back to IGR and having discussions to say, here's the new information, and here's where we recommend moving forward. Do you agree? And I think that's really the process that we're going to see throughout the legislative session, because there's, as I said, there's going to be 3,000 to 4,000 bills that are introduced, and who knows what those are going to have within them that we'd have to come back to IGR to have a discussion as per the operating agreements and the policies that have been set forth by council.
I just want to add the question about the process. I think what I would recommend is that I'd like to go back and look at the email that was sent out, the recommendation for it, and given today's comments about more interaction with the full council, I want to reflect on that and talk to Ethan about something we can just propose. So you don't actually need to have, I don't think at this point, a motion to have a new work session. We'll go back and just do that work and bring something forward.
Okay.
That would be fine. And in particular, what I'm interested in is regular full city council agenda items during the session on IGR items. So what I'm hearing about the behavioral health and mental health systems, and for the council and the community to get better educated about that, I think I need to put forward a work session poll, which I'll do in the short term.
Okay, thank you. And with that, I'd like to put a motion on the table.
Thank you, Mayor. Move to adopt the 2023 Eugene State and Federal Policies document and the 2023 Eugene State Priorities document as approved by the IGR committee.
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. Opposed? 2. So it passes 4-2. Thank you very much. And then we will come back, and then we have a
Point of order, Mayor.
yes.
Can we confirm which way Counselor Zelenka voted, because his hand went up when it was still
Voted.
yes, and then it kind of stayed up when it was
Okay,
no.
well,
I
I
vote
counted.
affirmative.
You can, I'm sorry, say that again, Alan.
I
'cause we couldn't
voted
hear you.
yes in the affirmative.
Oh, you did. Okay, thank you for that. I thought you voted no. So that passed then, 5-1.
With the understanding that we were going
Yes,
to,
with the understanding that we are coming back on language around measure 110.
right, that
Uh,
was my,
Okay. Okay, so I think, thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. Appreciate that. Great discussion. Thank you for bringing that to the table. And I apologize. We have a next item of business and we've cut your time a little short. So my apologies for that.
Just as they're walking up to the table, just a brief introduction. When we were here, I think earlier this year in April, giving an update on the parks and open space bond and levies, there was discussion about the levy expiring and some of the things you wanted to see. So today's presentation, we'll talk about that, about the current levy and some potential options moving forward since it expires next year. So I'm introducing the Craigs, Craig Carnegie, Craig Smith, Twyla Miller, to all lead the discussion. Thanks.
Good. Yeah. All right. Good afternoon, Mayor, Council, City Manager. Glad to be here. My name is Craig Carnegie. I'm the Parks and Open Space Division Manager. I'm here with Twyla Miller, our Finance Director, and Craig Smith, our Recreation Division Manager. And we're here to talk about pending funding needs and some of the ongoing challenges your parks and recreation facilities face. Before we begin, I just want to state that despite these funding needs and challenges you're going to hear about, Eugene has a truly amazing parks and recreation system. It's something we heard over and over again when people from all around the world visited us, track and field championships. It's something you probably already know, but we hear it all the time from residents. Parks are deeply valued by this community, and we definitely have our share of problems to solve, but most of the parks and recreation system functions very well. And we are all very fortunate to live in a city with such an awesome system. Currently, as Sarah mentioned, we're using a $3.1 million annual operating levy that began in 2018 to help close a funding gap to maintain this system. And this levy funding ends June 30th of next year. I'm going to start by describing how this funding gap developed, other revenue mechanisms besides the levy that were considered, how we've used levy funds since 2018 to enhance park services and close this gap. And we'll discuss the new challenges that have arisen over the last 4.5 years and what is needed moving forward in order to adequately maintain parks and recreation facilities. So how did we get here? The community holds expectations for what condition parks should be in. And generally this includes parks needing to be clean, green, and safe. So we know this from the relationships that we have with our park users, from our community engagement work, as well as resident surveys. And there are also national best practices for maintaining parks that we use as a benchmark to strive toward. For decades, park operations and maintenance were funded at a level that made it hard to fully meet these expectations and best practices. While the park system grew over the decades, corresponding maintenance funding to support this growth did not. And over the same time period, parks saw significant increases in safety and security issues, urban camping, vandalism, graffiti, and an aging parks and recreation facilities infrastructure requiring greater and greater maintenance needs just to keep up with what we had. So by the early 2010s, the general state of parks and recreation facilities had fallen into decline, as we reported regularly to the council. And for several years after that, we looked for ways to close the maintenance funding gap that had developed. And we considered several revenue mechanisms. A few examples of these were transient room tax, marijuana tax, sugary beverage tax, establish a maintenance endowment, a parks and recreation district, and a parks fee placed on e-web bills. And in 2017, after consideration and a report from counselors and staff, as well as other residents, it was determined by council that an operating levy was the most viable and expedient path. And I forgot to move more slides forward. So the 2018 5-year park operating levy included $3.1 million in annual funding for illicit activity response, such as camp cleanups and graffiti removal, vandalism, park custodial, reopening restrooms that were previously closed due to budget cuts and increasing trash and litter pickup. We had increased landscaping and tree care, so more frequent turf mowing, horticulture, hazardous tree abatement, and tree planting. We also had money in there for minor park infrastructure repairs, such as irrigation and concrete, lighting, park furnishings, play equipment. funds for natural area maintenance, invasive weed control, wildfire risk reduction, tree maintenance, and habitat enhancements. Park safety, we established a park safety team composed of our park ambassadors, who work closely with park resource officers, and we also added several different security service elements. The levy was also intertwined with the work of the 2018 Parks and Recreation Facilities Capital Bond. The 2018 Capital Bond addressed the declining conditions of existing park infrastructure, as well as building new parks in underserved areas. So the levy was designed to support the work of the bond by providing maintenance for these new parks as they were opened and help with the operating costs of a newly renovated community center and 2 swimming pools. In May 2018, this operating levy was soundly passed by voters. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about how the 2018 levy helped with the original funding gap. So we've provided you with an annual report for 3 years running about the positive outcomes we were seeing from this funding. Across the enhanced service levels made possible from this funding, we've seen significant improvements to parks and natural area maintenance, improved response to park safety and security issues, improved responses to graffiti and vandalism, and camp cleanups. Our annual park levy satisfaction survey for the last 3 years show residents are also seeing the difference these additional funds are making. Most recent results, 89% of residents say Eugene parks are important to their quality of life. 82% said adequately funding Eugene parks is important. 70% said 2018 park levy funds were worth the additional expense. And over 63% say Eugene parks are generally clean, safe, and well operated. But many of the challenges leading to the 2018 levy have continued to grow, adding more pressure to solve. Urban camping, illegal dumping, park rule violations, including increased bad behavior in parks, vandalism, open hostility, drinking, and drug use. There have also been new challenges that stretch this funding more and more, such as the pandemic, where we saw a huge increase in park usage, and that usage has remained higher than pre-pandemic levels. Also, inflation has increased all costs for materials and supplies, as well as contractual services. And we are seeing more intensive maintenance needs in new and renovated parks stemming from resident requests for more amenities. And with that, we're going to listen to a recreations facilities experience with levy funds over the last 4.5 years.
Thanks. Thank you. So Recreation had a bit of a different experience with levy funding over the last 4 years. We had initially projected from the very beginning that we would not require levy funding until our 3 bond-funded renovation projects were completed. Then levy funds for facility maintenance and program operations would begin to be applied. But most significantly in the year 4 and 5. We also projected increased revenues with our increased programming capabilities at all 3 of our updated and expanded facilities. Based on the 2018 Parks and Recreation System Plan goals, Gamble Senior Center, Echo Hollow Pool, and Sheldon Pool were chosen as bond projects because they were aging and in the most need for renovation. And also because we needed to address the service gaps in our aquatics community and to our senior population. So we did get Campbell Center and Echo Hollow Pool projects completed in a timely manner, and we were finally able to get Sheldon Pool opened last month. Those 3 facilities are currently spending levy funds for increased facility maintenance costs that are primarily a result of increasing the programmable space. The other impact on our operational spending, of course, our projected revenue earnings was the pandemic. Even as Campbell Center opened in 2021, we were operating under COVID protocols and significantly reduced services. And as you are all aware, we have been juggling our aquatics facilities and services based on facility availability and COVID protocols for over the last 3 years. So we have really yet to operate to our full capacity, both with our expenditures and creating our projected revenues. But as this current levy ends next June, we do hope to be in full operational mode. We now have 3 wonderfully renovated facilities, and we're preparing to use those facilities, those expanded facilities, to their utmost and offer programs that close the service gaps for aquatics patrons and senior services.
Okay, so if we had not had these additional funds over the last 4.5 years, we would have seen a continued decline in the Parks and Recreation system. not been able to keep pace with the capital bond work, and been even more underwater related to our response to camp cleanup and park safety. The levy, as Craig mentioned, expires next June, and most, if not all, these services will go away unless we find a different direction or funding is secured to keep this maintenance gap closed. In 2017, when the council approved a levy measure to go before voters, many councilors requested that we continue to search for a sustainable way to fund parks before the levy expired in 2023. Over the last year, we've researched other funding mechanisms similar to the review that we had prior to the 2018 levy, and we drafted a report, which a copy of that is in your packet. The Parks and Recreation Advisory Board has also reviewed this report and provided their feedback. And in this report, there were 3 possible funding scenarios described. The first column in the dark blue on the top, basically keep the funding at the same level as 2018. But due to inflationary cost increases and other growing challenges, it really equates to a service level drop from the original objectives of the 2018 levy. The second column, header in orange, is basically meeting our current service level requirements. So it addresses the inflationary increases, provides additional capacity to address some of the escalation and challenges we've seen. It adds an FTE to our camp cleanup crew. It adds FTE to our trails program, adds 3 FTE for maintenance of new parks built with the bond as they come online, and 1 additional park ambassador, as well as additional dollars for materials and supplies and contractual services. And now we're going to hear a little bit about recreation's current service level needs.
So recreation funding needs are identified in the middle row, community center O&M, and simply clarified in the difference between the 2018 levy and the 2024 service requirements. Our priority, as you can see, is to make sure that we have to cover the cost of our facility maintenance needs, which is $590,000 annually. But what we also need is the funding to fully activate those expanded facilities and serving our aquatics patrons and our senior services. As you can see, the operational funding differences is from $132,000 annually to $650,000 annually.
Okay, and then the final option is the green enhanced safety option. This builds on the current service level scenario by providing greater park safety coverage, both geographically across the park system and 7 days a week, security services to parks, with the addition of 2 more park resource officers, 2 more park ambassadors, as well as enhanced security services. So the conclusion of the revenue report was much the same as the 2017 search for a sustainable funding mechanism. The report essentially recommends renewing the levy at one of these 3 levels as the most viable and expedient way to keep the funding gap closed for another 5 years. The Parks and Recreation Advisory Board agreed that the funding scenario needed to be at least at the 2024 service requirement level, if not the enhanced safety scenario, and not simply kept at the 2018 option. And now Twyla is going to talk about the financial implications of these scenarios if a levy were chosen to move forward with.
Great. Thank you, Craig. So I'd like to start by looking at the assumption we used in the levy model. So this would assume a May election, so tax impact would occur beginning in July. So that's FY 24 to 28. We'd use a fixed dollar amount for the levy. This guarantees certainty for funding a service level rather than choosing a rate, which could fluctuate over time. We've also taken our service level and inflated them to FY 24 dollars. So we're starting off our model kind of right sized for the next 5 years. And we've also assumed a 7% expenditure growth rate annually. So this would be for inflation and then also for personnel costs over the time period to support the system that's put in place. We've also assumed a property tax collection rate of 94%. This is a little on the conservative side. Our actual rate is about 95.5-ish% generally, but this allows for uncertainty as we look forward to the future over the next 5 years, and is actually a prudent way to make sure that we're levying the correct amount and can anticipate any future fluctuations. And then as far as citywide assessed value and the typical home value, for the numbers you'll see today, we're using the FY 22 reports from the tax assessor. The tax assessor's office is about to drop their current reports for the current tax year over the next couple of weeks. We just don't have them yet. But so those are all of the pieces that are in the current modeling you're going to see here. So this slide looks at the tax impact of the funding levels. So the first, the option at the top is to maintain the current rate. So as Craig said earlier, we have our current levy is an average tax rate of 19 cents over 5 years. When we use the model using the current assumptions to get an average tax rate of 19 cents in over 5 years with all the current assumptions, we get an annual service level of $3.15 million, which also equates to the cost to an annual cost to a typical homeowner of $49. As Craig mentioned earlier, even though assessed values are rising due to the increased cost of expenditures and providing service with inflation and other things, the maintain the current rate actually does not fund the current service system, and some service adjustments would need to be made if that is the chosen path. Then there's the 2024 service requirement level that Craig talked about. The average tax rate over the 5 years there is 32 cents, with the cost to the typical homeowner annually of $83. And then finally, the enhanced safety option at 37 cents on average for the tax rate, and the cost to the typical home of $95 annually a year. I do want to talk about compression a little bit. We do think about compression when we're thinking about local option levies. So the chart that you're seeing here is our FY22 general government tax rate. I don't expect the FY23 numbers to be substantively different than this. So it's a good benchmark for the moment. As a reminder, there's a cap on the general government rate, so $10 per thousand of real market value. And when we go over that on an individual property basis, over the $10 cap, we fall into compression. And the way compression is addressed is in a two-part system. So first, all local option levies are proportionally reduced to see if that brings it down below the cap. If it's still above the cap at that point in time, then we start reducing proportionally the other components. So the city, the county, the urban renewal rate, and if there's a non-school special district rate as well. So those would be proportionally reduced on a property by property basis until you're below the $10 cap. So currently, under our current scenario, there's less than 55 cents remaining under the cap. And I just want to remind you as well, I know you all know, but the county has a parks levy on their ballot this November, and their levy is 16 cents per thousand. So our next slide here is really just showing for the scenarios we brought to you today, what compression would look like, the amount remaining if the county parks levy is enacted and one of our rates or one of our options is enacted, or to the column on the far right, if the county parks levy is not enacted, but one of those options is successful in the ballot in May, if the levy were to go forward. So that gives you an idea. So just a reminder on compression, when we raise levy rates or add a non-school special district or additional levies, it just impacts that compression issue on a property by property basis. So that was the financial information I have for you today. We're here looking for feedback on all the things we've talked about in the presentation today, including the funding scenarios. If council is looking to move forward with the levy, that staff has time between now and the end of the calendar year to do some polling. If that were the direction, we could come back in January with polling update, and then also update scenarios based on any feedback you give us today, and then also to incorporate the new assessor's information. And then finally, if council would desire to place a levy on the ballot in May, we would need action to place a resolution by mid-February so we can meet election deadlines to file. And that's all we have today. We're here to answer questions.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a queue of counselors, so I'll start with Randy and then Emily.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Twyla and the Craigs. I just had to say that. Sounds like a rock band. Appreciate the presentation. Twyla, has staff looked at any other funding sources other than property taxes?
Yes, we did have a revenue team that looked at a wide range of things. So we, many of the things that Craig mentioned earlier. So we went through the revenue report, the usual suspects, and looked at all of those pieces.
Any conclusions from that?
The conclusions, in the short term, knowing things that we could implement, that were cost effective in the short term and that had an access to this funding source really were the top two as in the report were the levy and then also the park service fee, which would be on the e-web bill. Those were the top two.
And did you feel that the park services fee on the e-web bill would be feasible?
There have been some conversations, and I think in the longer run, it's feasible. Potentially, and on conversations with staff, they are actually, e-web's actually going through a system update. And so now would not be the time. And there's some conversations that we need to have to happen to have all of those things go into place and have some system adjustments. So given that our levy ends at the end of this fiscal year, that's more of a long-term solution, but maybe not for this round.
I would be interested in hearing more about that at the appropriate time. Also, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that the southwest quadrant of our city, which happens to be my council ward, is the only quadrant that doesn't have a community center or a pool. The only public high school that isn't attached with a pool close by. So I would like to keep encouraging that, even though we obviously don't have a lot of money sitting around, but it is something where Southwest feels underserved, and we don't have a dog park either, by the way. Looking at your three options on slide, I guess 7 and 8 are the same slide, it looks like to me. I don't know how we can be successful without having the safety component. Right now, safety is a big issue in our parks. I'm feeling it especially in Southwest Eugene along the Fern Ridge bike path. Gunplay. I took a tour there recently, and I appreciate Craig Carnegie and Kelly and his staff coming out and joining some of residents and business people from the area to walk down and see what is actually going on in there. And it's pretty abysmal. I hope we can come up, and I know Craig's already shared some solutions that Parks and Open Space are looking at, and I very, very much appreciate that. And I know the people that were there that day on our tour appreciated it as well. So thank you. But anyway, getting back to the safety piece, I'm a big park supporter. I think it is one of the crown jewels of our city. I think it's important to the community, as evidenced by our survey. But again, if people aren't safe, if they don't feel safe, it really is a barrier to utilization. And, going back to that Fern Ridge bike path, the neighbors that are adjacent to that feel very unsafe. And I know the businesses are having challenges as well. And then the last thing I just wanted to say is, to me, this is one more indication of the importance of working as a council and city staff of trying to help grow our economy. As we grow our economy, things like this funding becomes less of an issue, and it's also helps provide good jobs for people. I mean, this is an important part of having a healthy community, and I just want to plug in for that and encourage my colleagues to be engaged and involved in that process. Thank you.
Thank you. Emily.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Excellent job. This is really important. We saw from the survey that the parks are one of the good things that people aren't upset about. So that's really critical for our physical and mental health as well as climate. I'm really wanting a poll because what I want may not be what the population wants. It's really hard because of inflation, and to see how much it would have to go up just to keep the same level is going to get some pushback. But at the same time, I can't see people being okay with our parks deteriorating. So I feel like the middle one is really the minimum one. As far as other revenue, back when we did the CSI, we went through that long list that in my budget folder has been reiterated over since many, many years. still applicable. When we talked about a fee on the e-web bill, really got into equity issues because everybody pays the same amount, whether you make $5,000 or $500,000. The tax, of course, is only on property owners, so that feels maybe not, fair. But since parks are used by everybody should pay. But the reality is, it would just really, really hurt some people, that fee on the bill. Our three issues are homeless, housing, and safety. One of our jewels is the parks. So want to keep the jewel, really need the safety. Although this levy would be about parks, being able to use the parks requires safety. So really having more park ambassadors and other safety measures is just as important as picking up the trash, because we're not going to want to use the parks if they're covered with trash. We need the medium just to keep the trash picked up. We need the extended one so that we can safely use our parks. And it will also address one of our other big issues, which is safety in general. So I want the big one, but I always do. And really, really want to hear what the public feel about this. And I hope you can explain, that we would be losing park services, we would be keeping it the same, and we would actually be able to use our parks more if we could keep them the same and increase the safety. We want polls. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to make sure I understood this orange slide with the compression considerations, because I am misunderstanding it. But are we saying that on the chart, for example, the last one, enhanced safety option is 37 cents. If the county parks levy is enacted, there's 19 cents left or that we could get, or both of us, then there would be 19 cents left.
Right, Counselor, so correct. So if both levies are enacted, so the county parks levy is enacted and the enhanced safety option are both enacted, under the current estimates, 19 cents would be left under the cap before compression starts on a property on average.
It is currently not, there would not be, okay, so on top
There'd
of
be
both
19
of
cents
us.
left. So we're getting,
both of us.
there's space for both, but we're getting closer to the.
We're getting close, very, very, very close. Yeah, I can see why that would be concerning. That's not very much money left, yeah. Okay, well, that's a whole nother conversation that we won't get into today, but I thank you for explaining the chart to me. I agree with Counselor Semple. I would also like to see some polling to see. I feel like folks that I talk to would be willing to pay more for enhanced safety. I think that's something that we've identified as a priority, but don't make assumptions, right? So I would love if we could ask folks to see if they're willing to pay that extra amount. I don't think we should consider a levy that would reduce services. I think the community has been pretty clear that they're happy with this level of service and we don't want to go down. So I would not be interested in doing that, but I would like to see if we could get support for the enhanced safety option. I think, and I'm glad you brought up your area because it's definitely underserved, and this isn't about that, but I think it's good to have it front and center because we know parks matter in people's lives, right? That's why we're here talking about this. It has an effect. And just lastly, I would say when I was a landlord, which has been a while, I took into consideration what my taxes were when setting my prices. So I think while you don't directly pay it, you're paying it in there. So we need to, we all can come together and figure out what's best for our finances and what we can afford. So that's it.
Thank you. Any other? Yes, Councilor Keating.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, and thank you, Councilor Groves, for bringing up the lack of dog parks in your term as well.
I thought of you.
Craig on the right, you kicked off this conversation with a revenue stream conversation from 2017 that I found most interesting, especially since this council has changed significantly since 2017. I would welcome a return to such creative revenue generating options. I was trying to write as fast as humanly possible, the sugary, syrupy, sweet consumption fee jumped out at me. Could you share with us again what council discussed in 2017? And I would encourage colleagues to consider revisiting this conversation.
Specifically on the sugary beverage tax?
You mentioned about 5 or 6.
Oh, yeah, it's in the report that we provided in the packet, and there's even more than what we had mentioned, and it provides, there's a matrix that provides kind of the pros and cons of each one of them. So we didn't really cover every one of them just because, you know, we had done this kind of review already, so we sort of glossed over that. But I mean, there's a number of options that, again, we looked at and really felt like either the levy or the fee on the EWA bill was the most feasible at this time. The rest of them have moderately significant cons, from administrative costs to not being able to generate enough revenue to cover this gap and other items. So I don't know if you want to add more to that, but there is information in that packet.
Could you repeat the ones you highlighted again, please?
The ones that I highlighted were the sugary beverage tax, the marijuana tax, transient room tax, Parks District, which is what we looked at originally in 17, the EWA bill, an endowment. We looked at that one, and then of course the levy.
Thank you. I look forward to revisiting that conversation. In 2018, the Register Guard reported that the city, in reference to the levy, that the city would hire police officers, quote, the city would hire police officers and unarmed park ambassadors to patrol parks that attract transients and crime, including Washington, Jefferson, and Monroe. The city would also spend $300,000 a year from the levy to frequently clean up illegal homeless camps, graffiti, and vandalism. Have we done that?
Absolutely.
It also indicates that the levy would deliver better, safer, and maintain parks and trails, renovate new parks and trails to serve the fitness, social, and recreational needs of a growing city. Have we done that?
Yes.
In South Eugene, residents have expressed to me their concerns around Amazon Pool. In particular, there are maintenance issues or lack thereof, or lack of maintenance personnel, staffing concerns, including but not limited to wages, and a desire for Amazon Pool to be open more than just a seasonal pool. Have you heard similar concerns?
That would be mine.
Greg on the left. Hi.
Yes, we've heard those concerns about Amazon Pool well, there's different concerns, but it's a gym. And so I've known about Amazon and worked with Amazon for over a decade. It is designed and built to be a seasonal pool. It makes some major renovation to turn it into a year-round operation. We did a feasibility and a triple bottom line study on that in, I think, 2014 to look at that. And then the other issue you mentioned concerning facility maintenance, it brought us through the pandemic. We kept that open while the other pools were closed, and it usually takes about a 3-month or a couple months maintenance period to keep up on things, and it's got another week or 2 left before it finally gets a break and gets to be maintained at its normal rate. And then the other challenges, staffing. Staffing is definitely a problem, not just in South Eugene at Amazon Pool, but regionally and across the country, as far as getting folks to work in our pool systems, lifeguards and swim instructors. So we're definitely been working on those issues. Very well aware of them.
It is a gem, and both for mental health and physical health. It's been welcome that it's been open as much as it has while the other pools have been under renovation. I would strongly suggest that there be renovation dollars put toward Amazon Pool, especially considering the swath of the electorate that are going to be coming out and hopefully supporting a renewal of this levy. So I've heard nothing but enthusiasm for keeping it open more and also investing the dollars to bring it up to standards. So I appreciate that, Mayor, and I also echo my colleagues' enthusiasm for a poll. The best poll we're going to see is on Tuesday, November 8th, when voters go out and support the county's parks levy. So I look forward to seeing how that plays out. And should we get a poll, I hope we would do it far removed from the November 8th election so as not to avoid any confusion. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. I think we are over time, and so we will close it at that. Thank you very much. Obviously, a lot of interest, and we're looking forward to the next conversation. And thank you. With that, we are adjourned.